stars remain, calling out through blood and pain. Torn apart but not yet broken. Names
Sensible
unspoken.
Hysteria, Book 1,
Bonds
Capra la Verte.
unshaken.
Intermission, the Underbelly of a Fallen Empire.
Good evening, dear listeners. I am speaking to you not from the grand halls of history, but from its forgotten corridors, the underbelly of a once mighty empire. Now, I'd wager most of you, when you think of a floating city, imagine its spires and towers, its grand temples and skyports. But I ask you this, what about below? What of the veins that kept the city alive? The hidden systems that no citizen ever thought about, yet depended upon every day? That, dear listeners, is exactly where Brand and Ang must have found themselves, fleeing for their lives through the city's unseen depths, running through the lifeblood of Olduvai itself. Down there, beneath the shining architecture, beneath the weight of civilization, they ran through the sewer system, a marvel of engineering that was far more than pipes and tunnels. You see, the Shori never did anything halfway. Even their sewers were a work of brilliance. Before we speak of the wonders below, let us first consider the weight these men carried as they ran. Brand and Ang fled without Koga, a name that now lingers as an echo in the wet corridors beneath them. In another time, in another place, the Shori would have honored their fallen companion with reverence. There would have been a wake, solemn and structured, where those who knew the deceased would leave an offering before a likeness, a token of remembrance, a piece of their story preserved in tribute. Their body would have been prepared according to the rites of their faith, their soul guided to its next destination. But Koga received no such ceremony. There was no wake, no sacred passage, no time for last words or reverence. His death was not marked by mourners, but by urgency, by the sound of boots splashing through wet tunnels as his companions ran from the same fate that took him. The ancient Shori believed in a legacy beyond death, in a continuation of the self. But Koga's legacy, if one remains, now clings to the boots of those who fled, carried not as memory, but as guilt. And where did they flee, dear listeners? They fled into the very veins of the city, into a world that few ever see, but one that sustained every life above it. Imagine, if you will, a network of tunnels, not of brick or stone, but of gleaming, magically infused steel. Unlike the crude plumbing of lesser civilizations, Olduvai's sewer system was built to endure, resistant to corrosion, resistant even to the wild and unpredictable effects of magic. Even now, centuries after the fall, these tunnels remain untouched by rust, their surfaces smooth as glass under the dim alchemical lighting that flickers along the walls. But this was no mere waste system. No, the Shori designed a living, breathing machine, a circulatory system of elemental forces. Water did not simply flow here. It was guided, filtered, purified through means that defied mundane technology. Pressure chambers harnessed a blend of mechanical force and elemental magic, ensuring that every drop of liquid reached its intended destination with precision. Kinestists, specialists in controlling the very forces of nature, once walked these tunnels, using their gifts to regulate the system. Heat was applied to purify and sanitize the water, ensuring that disease could not take root in the veins of the city. Air was summoned to direct the flow, keeping pressure stable and guiding currents to where they were needed. Earth was used to filter out waste, turning the impurities into dust that could be easily extracted. Water itself was commanded, shaped by unseen hands, moving through conduits not with mere gravity, but by will. At the height of its function, it must have been breathtaking. An entire city's water system, humming with life, shifting with the silent whispers of kinestists who kept its balance. But now, in the era that Brand and Ang ran through it, that balance is gone. The kinestists are no more. The regulators are dust. The system may still function, but without its keepers, how stable is it? You see, dear listeners, for all its brilliance, this system was always a delicate thing. Too much energy in the wrong chamber, and the pressure surges. A boiler left untended, and heat builds past control. A valve sealed shut for too long, and water has nowhere left to go but outward, violently, explosively. For Brand and Ang, this was not just a route of escape. It was a labyrinth of potential catastrophe. Every step was a risk. Imagine it. Metal walls slick with condensation, the air thick with heat and mist, the steady hiss and thrum of pipes carrying unseen forces. Imagine hearing a deep, slow groan as pressure shifts behind a wall. The ominous suggestion that something, somewhere, is about to give way. Did they realize as they ran that a single mistake could trigger a chain reaction? That one ruptured pipe could send scalding steam cutting through steel like a blade? That the system they now relied on to escape could just as easily bury them alive? Even now, I wonder, did the Shori truly believe they had made something eternal? Did they look upon these tunnels, upon these impossibly complex machines, and think they had crafted a system that would never fail? They saw themselves as masters of magic and science alike. They created wonders that still outshine modern attempts at engineering. But the truth, dear listeners, is simple. Nothing is eternal. Not their empire, not their flying cities, and not this intricate system, now abandoned, running on borrowed time. Brand and Ang may have passed through its depths, but the sewers of Olduvai are more than a means of escape. They are a relic of ambition, a symbol of a people who believed they had conquered nature itself. And yet, they fell. The sewers remain, but the hands that once guided them are long gone. The question is, how long will this system last without its masters? And how long before the delicate balance tips too far? So as you sit comfortably in your homes, listening to this tale, I ask you to consider this. If the greatest civilization the world had ever known could build something so perfect, so flawless, and still lose control of it, then what does that mean for the systems we rely on today? Perhaps Brand and Ang were not just running through a city's underbelly. Perhaps they were running through a warning. Something to think about.
Chapter 16. No Mercy for the Living.
Damas Barlays was not a man who ran. His whole life had been a game of balance, one foot in the light, the other deep in the dark, always one step ahead, always ready to bluff his way through the worst hands life had dealt him. But tonight, he was packing like a man, with nowhere left to run. His office was in ruins, papers strewn across the floor, old contracts and false identities crumpled and discarded in his desperate search for what mattered. Papers littered the floor, maps were torn from the walls, drawers left half open in a hurried search for anything worth taking. A man like Damas was never careless. His world was built on careful moves, on deception so finely tuned that even he forgot what was real and what was an illusion. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight he was running. His hands trembled as he cinched the straps of his satchel shut, breath coming short, clipped, uneven. He swept his desk with one last glance, frantic eyes darting across what remained. Ledgers, coins, promises, and betrayals inked in careful script. All meaningless now. There were things in the city tonight, things he had set loose, and he had no intention of staying to see what they would do. His fingers trembled as he cinched the straps of his satchel, breath coming in short, unsteady bursts. This was supposed to be his victory. This was supposed to be the last great job, the one that set things right. Instead, he had opened a door that should never have been touched. And now, the city would pay for it. The heavy iron door creaked open, and Damas whipped around fast, hand darting for the dagger at his belt. But it was only Grom. The half-orc's broad silhouette filled the doorway, arms crossed, expression tight with something between confusion and concern. His eyes flicked over the mess, taking in the overturned chair, the packed bags, the frantic energy thick in the air. His sharp eyes swept the room, taking in the mess, the chaos, the uncharacteristic panic gripping the man he'd known for years. His voice was calm, measured.
What the hell happened?
Damas turned back to his frantic packing, shoving a small golden idol into his bag, stuffing a bundle of old letters into his coat.
The job failed.
Grom took another step inside. His boots scraped against a fallen map, dragging it across the floor.
Failed?
His voice was edged with suspicion now.
What do you mean, failed?
Damas's fingers tightened on his bag, knuckles white.
I mean, it didn't go how it was supposed to.
He muttered. His voice was sharp, clipped, but it carried something that sent a shiver down Grom's spine, something raw, something close to fear. Grom narrowed his eyes.
Failed? How?
Damas let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his disheveled hair.
There were things down there.
He muttered, voice barely above a whisper.
Things worse than I imagined. Worse than I ever could have imagined.
He shook his head, a hollow laugh escaping his lips.
I was a fool, Grom. A blind, arrogant fool. I thought this was about payback. I thought I could take something back.
He stopped. His fingers clenched the edge of the desk, gripping it like a lifeline. Then, quieter.
I should have never left my family. Not even for...
But he didn't finish the sentence. Couldn't. Even now, even with everything falling apart around him, he couldn't say her name. Grom understood, and he had heard enough. Grom's hand moved before he thought about it. Crack. The slap echoed through the room. Damas's head snapped to the side, breath catching in his throat. His fingers lifted to his cheek, the sting sharp, sudden, grounding. When he turned back, Grom was staring at him, eyes bore into him, firm, unyielding.
Pull yourself together.
For a long moment, Damas said nothing. Damas's breath hitched, but something in his posture shifted. The trembling in his hands stilled. The panic in his eyes dampened, though it did not disappear. Then, slowly, he exhaled. His hands steadied, the panic dimming from his eyes. But it wasn't gone. It wouldn't ever be gone. But he was in control again. For now. Grom studied him carefully. Then, with a shift of his stance, he said,
The boy's here to see you.
Damas scoffed, reaching into the pile of clothes on his desk and pulling out a long, dark scarf. He tossed it toward Grom without looking.
Doesn't matter, I'm leaving.
Grom caught the scarf with ease, turning it over in his hands. The fabric was thick, dark as ink, edged with old, delicate stitching. A finely crafted thing. A magical thing.
What's this for?
For the kid,
Damas muttered.
it'll cover the burns.
Grom frowned, lifting the scarf between his fingers. He watched as the fabric shimmered faintly, the magic woven into it pulsing like a quiet heartbeat. Illusion magic. A trick of the eye, a lie made tangible. The boy's face would look untouched while he wore it. The scars would still be there, but the world would not see them. It was an expensive gift, and Damas had never been one for generosity. That's when Grom's voice came low, cautious.
And what about the crew?
Damas froze. His back was to Grom now, his head bowed slightly, a man on the edge of a decision he didn't want to make. Then, after a beat, his voice came low.
They're probably dead.
A pause, then quieter, too quiet.
Number worse than dead.
Grom's stomach twisted. A cold weight settled in Grom's gut. Damas never spoke like this. Never mourned before the bodies were found. Never gave up the game. And yet, standing here now, in this wrecked office, the man in front of him looked like someone who had already lost everything. That wasn't Damas. Not the Damas he knew. Not the smirking, lying, two-faced bastard who always had a plan. This was something else. Something closer to fear. Damas pulled a folded parchment from his coat, thrusting it toward Grom.
Here,
He said.
the contract.
Grom hesitated, then took it. The wax seal was crushed slightly beneath his grip.
And what do you want me to do with this?
Damas exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple.
If any of them come back alive,
He said.
give them the bar.
Grom felt the weight of the words settle in his chest. Not if they come back. If they survive at all. Damas adjusted the strap of his satchel, gaze fixed on the door. Grom swallowed.
And what should I tell them?
Damas paused. His fingers tapped against the edge of the desk. Just once. Just briefly. A habitual movement. One born from hesitation. Then at last, he let out a quiet breath.
Tell them I'm sorry.
And with that, Damas Barlays, the man who had spent his whole life stacking the deck in his favor, turned and walked out the door. Leaving behind only debts, ghosts, and an empty seat at the table.
Chapter 17. Blood, Debts, and Desperation.
The stink of the sewers still clung to them, a festering stench of rot, filth, and stagnant water that refused to fade no matter how much time passed. Ang and Brand had spent a full day hiding, their bodies broken, their minds numb with exhaustion. Koga was dead. Damas was gone. And they had nothing to show for it except wounds, debts, and a mission that had long since spiraled beyond their control. For the longest time, neither of them spoke. Then,
I'm going to the Broken Wing.
Ang muttered, voice hoarse, cutting through the silence like a dull blade. Brand, slumped against the damp brick wall of their hiding spot, cracked open a swollen eye and sighed.
You're an idiot.
He said flatly. Ang turned, scowling.
We haven't been paid.
Brand let out a breath that was somewhere between a laugh and a groan.
You really think that snake is still there? Damas is gone, Ang. He probably started running the second things went sideways.
Ang crossed his arms, grimacing from the movement. His ribs ached, his knuckles were split open, and the bruises across his body had deepened into something ugly and purple.
Then how are we supposed to pay for healing?
He shot back.
We don't exactly have a banking account, and I don't see you pulling gold from your ass.
Brand rolled his head back against the wall, lips twitching in irritation. Then slowly, he lifted a hand and let Koga's emerald necklace dangle between his fingers. The gem caught the dim light, its surface marred with flecks of dried blood and sewer grime. Ang's eyes darkened.
No.
Brand sighed, shaking the necklace slightly.
It's a nice piece. It'll get us what we need.
Ang's jaw clenched.
It was Koga's.
Yeah, and Koga's dead.
The words landed like a hammer between them. Ang's hands curled into fists, but he didn't argue. Because Brand was right. Because they had no other choice. Because they needed to survive. After a long, tense pause, Ang exhaled sharply through his nose.
Fine.
Brand pushed himself up with a pained grunt, stretching his stiff limbs.
Good. I know a place.
The pawn shop sat wedged between two buildings, its wooden sign half crumbled and gnawed by time, weather, and neglect. The paint had peeled away long ago, leaving the words Angel's Grinders barely legible beneath the grime that caked the walls. It stank of oil, rust, and something sweetly chemical, the kind of scent that clung to the back of the throat and made a man wonder if he was better off not knowing its source. The door creaked on its hinges as Brand and Ang stepped inside, and the floor beneath them felt sticky, as if the filth had settled into the wood and refused to let go. Inside, the shelves were a mess of junk and forgotten lives. Rusted weapons, dented armor, old books with pages yellowed from smoke and damp, trinkets of unknown origin, all piled together without care or purpose. A few locked glass cases sat near the counter, displaying more expensive goods, but it was clear that most of what was sold here was taken off the desperate, the dying, or the soon-to-be dead. Behind the counter, hunched over a ledger thick with ink stains and hastily scrawled notes, sat Oid Simmons. She was a goblin of advanced years, her skin a mottled mix of green and brown, as if she had spent too much time under the wrong kind of light. Her thin, wiry hair was pulled into a tight bun. Thick-rimmed spectacles perched on her pointed nose, amplifying the sharp, cunning glint in her beady little eyes. As they entered, she barely looked up. Then she sniffed. Then she grimaced.
God's alive, you reek.
She waved a clawed hand in front of her nose.
You drag a corpse in here with you? Or is that just your natural scent now?
Brand sighed.
Nice to see you too, Granny Simmons.
Oid snorted.
I told you to stop calling me that.
Yeah, well, you still married to that useless bastard of a husband?
She barked out a sharp laugh.
I ought to be so lucky. No, the bum ran off to find himself again. Probably drinking himself stupid down by the pits, or worse, trying to reinvent himself as some kind of wandering alchemist.
She rolled her eyes.
Dumbass couldn't mix a proper batch of mumia if I gave him the ingredients myself.
Ang shifted slightly at the mention of the drug. Mumia, ground preserved flesh, stolen from tombs or worse, smuggled through the underbelly of the city for those desperate enough to believe in its supposed enhancing properties. Oid sold a little bit of everything, after all. If a man was looking to offload a cursed trinket, a blood-stained relic, or the finger bones of a saint, this was the place to do it. She leaned forward, thin lips curling into something like a smile, her sharp teeth just visible beneath her cracked lips.
Now, what the hell do you two want? I don't do charity work.
Brand pulled out the emerald necklace, letting it dangle from his fingers. For the first time, Oid actually looked interested. She reached for it fast, her little fingers gripping the gem tight, holding it up to the low, grimy lantern light. The gem sparkled, even beneath the grime of filth and dried blood. Oid clicked her tongue.
Nice piece. Where'd you get it?
Family heirloom.
Brand deadpanned. Oid barked out another laugh.
Yeah, sure. And I'm the queen of the first core.
She turned the necklace over, rubbing her thumb against the edges of the emerald, checking the setting, checking for enchantments, checking for traps. It didn't glow, so no obvious magic. Good. She hummed thoughtfully, nodding to herself.
Well, I ain't in the charity business, so let's get to it. This is worth a lot less than you think.
Ang's fists clenched, but Brand put a hand on his shoulder before he could snap back.
Yeah?
Brand said instead, his tone light, but his eyes sharp.
And why's that?
Oid grinned.
Because I say so.
The haggling was brutal. Oid ripped into every flaw she could think of, complaining about how hard it was to move stolen goods, how emeralds weren't as valuable as rubies, how she was already doing them a favor by even considering buying from two filthy sewer rats who had the stench of bad business on them. She toyed with them for sport, dragging the conversation out, letting them sweat through every counteroffer, every rebuttal. In the end, they got far less than the necklace was worth. But it was enough. Oid slid a pouch of coins across the counter, along with 2 small vials filled with murky red liquid.
Here,
She grumbled.
it ain't much, but it'll keep you from dying too fast.
Bran picked up a vial, tilting it toward the light.
This the real stuff?
Oid squinted at him.
You think I'd try to poison you? You're not worth the effort.
Bran smirked.
You just love me too much.
Yeah. Get the hell out of my shop.
Ang took the pouch of coin, his scowl deep and silent. They had sold what little remained of Koga to a woman who wouldn't even remember their names tomorrow. And that stung. But survival cost more than pride. Without another word, they left. Outside, the air was thick with city smog, the murky twilight settling over the streets. Aang tucked the coins into his belt, securing the potions inside his coat. Then, with a grimace, he straightened up.
I'm going to the Broken Wing.
Brand exhaled, rubbing his temples.
You really gonna waste your time on that?
We still haven't been paid.
Brand gave him a dry look.
You think Damas is gonna be sitting there waiting for you?
Aang shook his head.
Doesn't matter. If he's gone, Grom will be there. Someone's going to answer for this.
Brand clicked his tongue, rolling his shoulders.
Yeah, well, you do that.
Aang frowned.
And you?
Brand's tired smirk returned.
I'm going to the docks.
Aang narrowed his eyes.
You think Damas is skipping town?
Brand scoffed.
A man like him, running before his sins catch up with him? Oh yeah, he's gone.
Aang grunted, muttering a curse under his breath. Brand patted his shoulder,
You go growl at Grom, I'll go snake hunting.
and just like that, they split. One toward the Broken Wing, toward whatever Damas left behind. The other toward the docks, chasing a ghost in the water.
Skyborn kingdom built on high, but rust and ruin stain the sky. Chains are breaking, ghosts arise, whispers carve through shattered minds. Watch the fall, hear the cries. Truth is lost and it'll divide.